For a long time, I looked at stone as nothing more than a stage, supporting my lead characters. And now, I want to place stone at the center of my frame.
So, hi, Sofie Benoot. Welcome to Vision de Réel. We were very impressed from your film Apple Cider Vinegar. We'd like to talk with you now about your film. In your film, it's a question about mineral, actually a little stone at the beginning, and then mineral in general. How were you attracted to this topic, and how was the trigger actually to do a film, a long film, a feature film about this, and not just, I don't know, a little filmic reflection?
Well, it came out organically out of my previous work, which my previous film all took place in desert territories. So I always had a fascination with how humans relate to landscape, and especially landscapes that we in the Western world consider dead, barren, lifeless. Because for me, it's a sort of a metaphor of how we look at nature in general, as something far outside of us. And then I wanted to do something about stone because of that, because if you find a metaphor for how we look at nature, you can find it in how we look at stone, outside, far away, dead, for our use, extraction-wise, in the background. And another path leading me there was then that I had recurring nightmares throughout my life where I dreamt of stuff growing out of my body, like plants and horns and stones, a bit gruesome. And I've had this all my life. I thought like, okay, what are these dreams trying to tell me? And of course, I'm not really a dream interpreter, but for me, it's sort of like the idea that we place nature so far out of it, and my dreams try to tell me like, okay, you find it strange that it's growing out of you, but perhaps it's not as far from you than you think. Perhaps you should accept that and not find it so gruesome. And I thought a kidney stone was a very good starting point for that sort of thinking, like how we think things are so much outside of us, but in fact we are like little volcanoes making stone ourselves, and we are like this whole geological mechanism ourselves. So I found that a really beautiful image, that of a kidney stone, yeah.
The question of the image, I mean, the image is a question in your film, and you use a lot the webcam. The webcam are thematized, and not just used, but thematized as elements. So it's a reflection about the relationship with human, organic and non-organic, human and mineral, but at the same time also a reflection about how we human look at this, and about gays in general.
Yeah, this film is really a puzzle film where all sorts of threads try to meet each other and find these intersections. It was a really hard thing to make all this puzzle together with all these different layers. But indeed, one of the layers is like how we look at nature. And it came about because I was always fascinated by the figure of David Attenborough, because of course I grew up with his nature documentaries, like a lot of us do in Western Europe. And it forms our way of how we look at nature. And again, even though I still love watching it, I have a lot of thoughts about it, how it's still like this, placed as almost another world. Like if I watch it, I almost don't believe that it's our planet. It's so crisp, highly crisp blue. Everything is so filmed with the new technologies. It's almost like another planet for me. And there's no human presence. His voice is hovering above it like a voice of God. I wonder like, okay, these times need other ways of reimagining nature. And so my film is a sort of an investigation of how we can do that. Like what images, that's what my narrator in the film asks herself, what images should I tell, show you, what stories should I tell, and how? My film is a sort of a proposal of these, not answers because, or temporary answers, but mainly trying to formulate these questions around imagining nature, like how should we look at it? And webcams is a really fascinating territory that I didn't know of. Is like there's this whole world of on the internet of people watching almost surveillance footage of nature. They are staring for hours and hours at the screen, pointed in the wilderness, just to wait for animals. And I found there tons of beautiful metaphors for our gaze in nature. and our search for community through the internet with each other around these webcams. So yeah.
The webcams, in a sense, is a sort of also figure of neutrality and of the neutral scientific gaze that is also typical in this naturalist documentary by David Attenborough. At the same time, what is interesting now, because before probably the webcam were more fixed or static, and now, and you show also this, that are people, actually you can focus, you can move, so there is something more subjective also in this use of the webcams. It's something that also catch your attention, or you wanted to question the neutrality of what the webcam gaze.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like in nature documentaries, the waiting has been done for you. Like these people wait also for hours and hours, but in webcam you have to do the waiting yourself. What I find beautiful is like this idea of it's a webcam. The technology was developed for surveillance, like for really more ugly, for catching people in not so nice things. But in webcams, somehow I find it almost like it's more for keeping vigil, like all these people watching. It's like a form of caregiving also, like keeping vigil, stand guard. And there's some form of poetry for me in all these people watching together these images. And then indeed, it shows there's a lot of distance. I mean, we are sitting here and watching images from over there, and the whole film is this whole play between all sort of distances that collapse, the distance between my body and stone, the distance between all these images from very far entering my living room. And even in the voiceover, when she watches the webcam, sometimes the animals react to her, and so these sort of crumbling of different spaces and screens, that was my intent to do. Yeah.
Just speak more about the narrator and this voiceover. I mean, it's something, of course, mimicking in a sense the classical attitude of David Attenborough, or something we know. At the same time, you play really with this character. This character is ironic, self-ironic, and that's why also self-critical. But in general, how do you imagine to really put it so in the center, and that's why also to create a sort of distance to it, because as a figure, as a character, because it's not just a classical voiceover accompanying you through the films. It's something that you have to face as an element of the film.
Yeah, it's the first time that I'm using a voiceover, and it's a real challenge to do so, because it's, again, I wanted to do it to critique it, but at the same time use it, because there's always a form for me, like a love-hate relationship, and to investigate it while using it. So that's a fine line to do so sometimes, because you're like, okay, am I now, where's the irony level, where's the realness, where's the tenderness? And so it was a whole play between all those levels for me for using a voiceover. But what for me was really important was that it was written from this perspective of somebody who has been reporting on nature for our whole life, and whose vision of nature changed with the times and is now really being challenged with these urgent times, asking her questions. And for finding the voice itself, I found like I need someone who also embodies this very Britishness, like David Attenborough. Like I needed a dame, like a grand figure of British filmmaking. So I came upon Sian Phillips, who is like she's also like David Attenborough is a sir and she's a dame, and I really needed this sort of voice with authority, but also somebody who has a level of playfulness in it, who can understand my trajectory and my film and my irony. And she was she was wonderful. We enjoyed working together so much, and she got it, and you have to find the right chemistry. And I was afraid that I had to do several tryouts with different people, but from the first time I knew she's going to be the greatest.
Thanks to her and this character, we are empathetic with their feelings and with their search and with their self-criticism. At the same time, it remains an element of distance as a viewer, I mean.
Yeah.
And I think that this distance is very balanced from the strength, from the force of the images. So the question now will be more about the editing, because I think you had to balance this element of distance and be, I could say, immersion through the editing. And also because you have images of details, so very close, very zoomed and close, and also landscape and almost cosmic dimension, so that is far and close. How did you work actually on the editing table with this distance, immersion, close and far?
Yeah, that's why the editing took like, I would say, almost a year, and I had to do it mostly myself, because not only about these distances, but also like it's a puzzle film, like you say, and it's indeed a question of filling gaps. Like you have the gap between the kidney stone and the planet in general, and the whole film is trying to fill that gap in a way between the two. And so, and in filling that gap, you are puzzling, trying to make all the links that suddenly bring all these things together. So that was sort of the process of editing, is seeing it as a puzzle to fill the gaps that we think they are empty, but they're full of stories. So that was my editing process. I think I have to start from a kidney stone, I have to end with the whole world. Very ambitious. And then that's why it took so much time. And it's a whole thing of weaving. It's a lot of weaving things together. Weaving a voice inside the image, outside again, inside again. And so it's a crazy process to do. And it's only at the end of my editing process that I really invited an editor, Leo Gong, with me. Because speaking of distances, then I was too close to the film. I couldn't find any distance anymore to be able to continue myself. And she really helped me create my character even more, and my narrator even more inside the film. So yeah, but editing was like, it's also, when you make a film with a voiceover, like more essayistic, editing is writing and writing is editing. It's not that you write a text before and then you edit and you just put the text on it. You literally write while editing. I literally wrote while speaking into the microphone on my images, like how does it work, how does it feel, how does it interact. So that's why it's necessary to do it alone as well, because if you would invite somebody in to that process, it would have be very weird. So it was sometimes lonely to do as well, yeah.
Another element of the editing process is also the sound. I really would like to know not only how do you create the sound, but also how do you work with the sound in the editing, because I think it's also an element that is very important in order to convey this display between being inside very close and a sight or a perspective from very far. So you start already with the concept and then you model this concept in the editing?
Yeah, sound, well, you have, of course, the sound of the images, and then you have the sound of the voice. And for me, voice is first more a sound, because the first impression that you give with a voice, it's like a tone, a warmth, a presence. So for me, the first word of the film, I didn't want it to be information. I didn't want it to be like a sentence, because I find it sometimes when I watch films with voiceovers, and the first time, okay, you hear the voiceover and immediately you're like, okay, I have to pay attention, and there's no time to get to use the warmth and the presence of somebody. So that's why my first sound of the voice was like a simple ah. But in the screening here, people didn't hear it because they were laughing. I was like, and so that was a bit funny. And the laughter that came after. So that's the first setting of the sound for the voice. And then for the editing, for me indeed, and the sound design, which my partner did, Guillaume, was indeed again this whole play between sometimes going out and sometimes going in, because there's different rooms and spaces in the film, and they all have their particular sounds. Like the webcams have their sound, the images have their sound, and I want sometimes to be very breaking, like very hard cuts, but sometimes that the sounds flow to each other, like this permeability of the screen, like the voiceover flows into the spaces of the film and the spaces flow into her room. So this was the whole play and editing. And also towards the end, I wanted to be become more immersive, more sound design, where you almost enter a bodily space, like it's a bit an underwatery feeling of being inside somebody. That's how I communicated it with Guillaume, was like, imagine to be from somewhere inside with a sort of permeable screen about it and hearing the outside, but only a bit muffled, in order to talk a bit about this, because by the end of the film, the planet and the stone really come together, and it's from this place of inside the body that we look at this planet there. So that was a little bit the play with the sound and the mix, which was really an important part of the film. Yeah.
In order to speak about the relationship between, and this conflation between human and mineral, organic, non-organic, that's a thread, that's a movement of the film, that's the experience that you do through the films. At the same time, in order to do this, I have the impression you have to decenter your perspective, and so all the film is an exercise in shifting the perspective, and so try to imagine things from very specific point of view. For example, there's the classical exercise of geology, or trying to understand the things from the point of view of geology. So this multi-perspective dimension of the film was also a guide for you to cast, in a sense, your characters, because you have a lot of also different places, England, Palestine, California. I mean, was it for you important not only through film, through the shooting, but also that in general you approach the same theme from very different places? And how did you proceed actually?
Yeah, again, I needed to have, in the choice of my places and characters, I also wanted to have this game between distance and closeness, is that it needed to feel as a story about a planet. So you needed to feel the diversity of places and people in every sort of aspect. You needed to feel like it's encompassing, but also because a lot of nature documentaries do the same. They go to all sorts of places of the planet, but they want to give an impression of a wholeness, like the planet. While I'm more interested in the holes in between, to show the gaps in between, and to play with these like gaps and contrasts in between the stories. So that was a bit my intention with choosing these places. Is like, of course, I chose places because they are dear to me. Because you can, if you make a film about stone, you can find stone everywhere in a sense. But it needed to have this feeling of planet, and like these places and the distances being brought together, and yet stay separate in a sort of a way.
And how is now your perspective? I mean, doing a film is a big journey, of course, but it's also a learning process. I mean, it's also a process where you learn a lot of things. How did you feel now that your perspective, your personal perspective, has changed thanks to the film?
Yeah, good question. A lot, I think, but that's a thing that, because a film, that's a final product, and it seems like it was written in the beginning and just made it out, but the film, how it evolved, already contains the questions that I arrived with at the end. And so that is a little bit, my thing is, I did not so much find answers as I found new questions to pose myself, which I find really interesting, because we always think that a film is trying to answer a question, but I ended up with more questions. And these questions, I'm going to try to continue working on them, and it's continuing thinking about this relation, like between the human and the non-human, and between how to imagine. It's a continuous quest for finding ways to approach this current crisis. That's why I wanted to end my film more with a question than with an answer, and I hope that I can continue. I wanted to find new ways of imagining things, and this is the answer. It's just like a temporary stage to invite other filmmakers as well to reflect on that and to think about it, not to say like, this is the way now, how you should make films in a way. So in a way, I'm also inviting other people to think about it, but I also invite myself to continue to think about this same question about how to make films about this current crisis.
It does look like a pebble from the beach.
They are plastic.
Really?
Even that one.
You heard Sofie Benoot, the director of the film Apple Cider Vinegar, screened at Vision du Réel 2024. Interview recorded by Giuseppe Di Salvatore and Ruth Bettig, editing Morgane Frund, a production by Film Explorer. If you liked this episode, don't hesitate to follow us. We explore films in various formats and languages. Thank you for listening to us.